It is the Philadelphia Phillies world, and the rest of the MLB is just living in it. We enter the second half of the season after the All-Star break has now concluded, and the Phillies were well represented during the break. We saw a franchise record 8 Phillies land at the All-Star break and make their appearance in the game. Also saw Alec Boehm represent in the home run derby, and it just shows what a wagon this team has been. So I want to dive into each of these players, a little bit of a takeaway from what we saw from them, and just acknowledge just how special it is for this Phillies organization. So I'll start out with just putting this into perspective that the 2024 Phillies are sending 7 players to the All-Star game, and this did become 8 after Ranger Suarez was a late scratch due to some back soreness, which paved the way for Christopher Sanchez to step his way onto the mound. But the Phillies sent a combined 6 players in the All-Star game from 2014 to 2019 combined. So just think about that in perspective. In that 5-year period of time, just 6 players representing the Phillies, and then in the All-Star break this season that we're seeing that many players represent. Pretty special stuff for this Phillies team. And to dive into who exactly they are, let's take a look at our guy Luke Arcaney tweeting out that, and Luke will be right back on this channel shortly. Says your 2024 Phillies All-Stars: Alec Boehm as a starter at third base, Trey Turner as a starter at shortstop, Bryce Harper as a starter at first base, who did suit up for the All-Star break there. Saw all 3 of those guys represent in the infield, and for what it's worth, this is the first time that 3 infielders from the same team have represented in the National League since 1983. So shout out to the Phillies for that once again there. In addition, we got Zack Wheeler, the ace that we know him to be, Ranger Suarez, who was a late scratch due to that back soreness, Matt Strahm, who looked good in his one inning, Jeff Hoffman, who cruised through his inning, and of course Christopher Sanchez. So Luke tweets that it's the first time in franchise history that the Phillies have had 6+ All-Star 6+ players at the All-Star game. I believe that number is 5, that they have never had under 5 leading up to that, and of course it did end up being 8. And Christopher Sanchez was the late addition there. We know how elite that he has been this season. I do think that has been the biggest development for this Phillies team when putting into perspective the long-term outlook and how good this team can be. That Christopher Sanchez has been gone from a guy that is debatably in the rotation and not even a surefire lock to be a guy that can be that consistent 5th starter to a dude that is a legitimate All-Star. To look at his stats on the year, that among qualified National League starters, Christopher Sanchez is 2nd in FIP at 2.58 and 4th in WAR at 2.9 per Fangraphs. If he was on any other team, he probably would have been an All-Star. Have to think he has a shot to still make it as a replacement, and that is exactly how things played out there. And shout out to Christopher Sanchez. It did feel like he was enjoying the weekend in a way that I think is special. It's always interesting to see how these players treat it a little different, that it's purely business for some of these guys that are still locked in doing their things. There's some guys that are completely locked out, just having a good time, hanging out. For Sanchez, it felt like he was enjoying in the moment in a way that he deserved. And kind of a cool little anecdote that goes along with this is he obviously had a strong finish to last season where he looked really sharp in the second half of the year and was asked entering the offseason, what are your goals for next year? And he said, I'm going to be an All-Star. And it did feel like something that was a little bit of a high reach at the time, but boy, he has filled those shoes quite well. Now, one of the guys that I think it was really put into perspective, and this should not be a surprise at this point, but just how much that Bryce Harper is the face of baseball. Beyond just the mic'd up, beyond all the interviews that he did, talking to Big Papi and all the other just interviews that he was seen on the red carpet and everywhere else, I thought a really cool moment of acknowledgement came from Shohei Ohtani himself, who is Mr. Baseball at this point. And Shohei Ohtani was asked of all the players of the All-Star game he was impressed by, he said, quote, Bryce Harper stood out to me. Now, Shohei, you missed the boat. There was the opportunity for you to come to Philadelphia and be teammates. That obviously did not play itself out. I think he's just fine after leaving the Angels and doing just pretty well with the Dodgers out there. Of course, him not pitching, it is turning into kind of a 2-horse race for this year's MVP between Shohei Ohtani and Bryce Harper there. I think for Bryce's sake, this feels like a year where you kind of got to get the job done, because once Shohei steps back on the mound and you're adding another elite skill to all the things that he's already great at, it's just going to become more difficult. So I do think the path is paved for a long period of Shohei Ohtani MVPs, but I am hopeful that Bryce Harper can get the job done and add another one to his collection as well. And as much as Bryce Harper has been the face of this franchise, he is the guy that everything revolves around, both when speaking in the context of this era of Phillies ball, how he has been the guy that you put in place and all these pieces have come around him. He's been the identity of this organization, and also in the standpoint of actual production on a night-to-night basis, that Harper is having an incredible year. When you dive into the stats, it's even more impressive than it frankly feels like. That we haven't had this Bryce Harper tear that we've felt throughout his career, where we've had these just 2-week stretches where he just can't stop hitting the ball and things like that. Feels like we haven't had that period, but he's just been so consistently good throughout the course of the season that those stats are standing up the test of time. But it is not just Bryce Harper. That for really the first time in this era, it does feel a top-to-bottom team effort for this Phillies team. And the pitching staff particularly has been one that has stepped up, and in my mind, the driving force for why I feel differently about this Phillies team compared to the ones in past years that have come up a little bit short in the biggest moments. But to acknowledge the Phillies staff as a whole, this is the first time in Phillies history that the Phils have 3 pitchers with 10 wins before the All-Star break, those, of course, being Zack Wheeler, Aaron Nola, and Ranger Suarez. And that goes without saying all that we've just talked about with Christopher Sanchez and what he brings to the table there. So when you do all tie this together with this elite level pitching staff, guys, that all 4 of those primary starters, and this, of course, I mean with Zack Wheeler, Aaron Nola, Ranger Suarez, and Christopher Sanchez being rightful all-star nominations, along with the talent in the field, with 3 guys in the infield, as well as all the additional talent that is there. And that's not even leaving out some of these players that are worth acknowledging. That JT Realmuto would have had a case, that you could have made the argument that he deserved it. A guy like Brandon Marsh looked on pace to be an all-star himself for most of this year and kind of cooled off towards the end there. We know the issues with hitting lefties and like what comes with Marsh. So we'll see how things shape out, but the talent on this Phillies team is deeper than feels like ever before. There's still a lot to break down as the trade deadline is inching closer. It does feel like they are absolutely in win now mode, and it feels like this has to be a year in which you are all the way in. So I do expect this Phillies team to be making a move to push all those chips in the middle and truly go for it this year. We already dropped a video on this channel talking a little bit about Luis Robert. It's seeming less and less likely that that is the case, but it does feel like that is still the position that they are looking to attack. In addition to another bullpen arm, and the bullpen has been great, so it's not something that I'm overly concerned with, but you can never have too much pitching there. It does feel like the outfield power bat is the target that Dave Dombrowski will have circled on his wish list as things inch closer. So I'm very excited to dive down and see what this team fully looks like as they get ready to fight deep into October and get ready to be dancing on their own all over again. So appreciate all you guys for tuning in this video here. We're going to be cranking out more content right here on Phillies Digest from start to finish. We got a ton of big plans, sorting through some tech issues on this end, so apologize for a little bit of bugginess in kind of the videos beforehand, but we're going to be off to the races from here. Got plenty more coming out, so make sure you're smashing that subscribe button, dropping a like on this video, and everything else that you have to get involved in the conversation. Drop any comments below. There's going to be plenty more coming out, so stay tapped to your new home for Phillies news right here on Phillies Digest, and talk to you next time. Peace.